All right, so that's live. We're live here. So get into things. So like I said, welcome to Mind.Body.1 Week. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Happy birthday, love. But like I was saying, Mind.Body.1 is, I consider like my baby. Like everyone who has a business, I know a lot of people follow me, have their own business. You consider your business like your baby, right? So that's why I want to do Mind.Body.1 Week to be like, okay, there's all types of different days, weeks, months for different causes. So Mind.Body.1, if you follow me, you already know what we're about. Mental health and performance in a variety of ways. It could be through the traditional like mental skills, mental coaching, building up a rapport of like coping with day-to-day stressors, or it could be more the cognitive stuff. I know a lot of people know me a lot for that, like the cognitive reaction training, decision-making, things like that. From the physical side, actual fitness, or how we integrate the fitness with the cognitive and the mental. So however you look at it, Mind.Body.1 stands for all of that. And another reason why I wanted to do it for this week is because I actually started Mind.Body.1 officially in November of 2016. Now, it was actually later in the month. It was the 16th of November, but I was trying to just make it all coincide. So this next week, I'll be putting out different content, some from me, some from my team, and we'll be talking about different things such as social media, mental health, just general stress management, athletes, sport, fitness, things of that nature, and just things that help you, day to day, as I always do, but making it a whole celebration. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'll definitely answer those. But the few I got beforehand, thanks. Oh, Chanel, what's up? So beforehand, I got a question from my friend Jeremy, and he's a businessman, entrepreneur. We actually met on that tip, and he actually does my search. He actually made this shirt, so shouts out to Jeremy. He does all my Mind.Body.1 shirts with the new logo, this new logo right here with the brain neuron. I don't know what I'm gonna call this. It's a little different. If you don't know, for the last 6 years, it's been the 4 circles, red, yellow, green, blue. And it was kind of associated with FitLight, and I've worked with them for about 6 years as well. And I just thought it was time to rebranch, and I've gotten some good feedback. Tell me what you think on the new logo. So this is a new Mind.Body.1 logo. You may still see the old one too. It's not that I'm getting rid of it. It's just that this will be the main logo. Now that might be maybe for other things, for maybe the performance side, the drills. But basically, Jeremy gave me a question about business, and me, I'm not a businessman in the sense of I had formal training. I definitely didn't. My background is psychology and exercise physiology, but through trial and error, I've done a lot of work through my own business, learning how to get clientele beyond just the typical B2C, which is business to client. A lot of people, when we talk about business models, because I do consulting with people in my industry, at least with business, and they talk about B2C, B2B, or say SaaS models. And if you're not familiar with this, B2C is pretty much the most common. That's business to client. So if you have a product, you have a service, you go straight to that person or people. Now, B2B is business to business, and that's more so doing things for other entities, corporations, businesses, organizations, teams, or whatever it may be. Now, that one's a little bit different. And then SaaS is software as a service, which is when your actual product or technology does the service for an entity. So not to get too deep into that, but when I started Mind.Body.1, it was a B2C. I didn't know much more than that. And most don't. And it's not a bad thing, but it's just understanding how to serve these different populations. So if you are a B2C, business to client, you got to understand it's a volume game. It's numbers. So I didn't really understand that. I was thinking like, okay, if I get this many clients, maybe charge this much, I can make a decent living or income, whatever you want to call it. But I didn't understand that that's just one stream. And you hear people say you need multiple revenue streams. This is why I think a lot of entrepreneurs starting up make this mistake. And it's not because they don't know better, nor they don't know better, but it's not because they don't want to be better. It's just that you don't go to school for this. You may not understand. But if you only have one route, which is business to client, that's the only way you can get income. So I started branching out to other ideas. Like I started making ebooks, online courses, workshop. I started creating my own cognitive and mental training tools and charts and grids. So I started saying, okay, how else can I serve my clients? So I expanded. Still was B2C. It was still going from me to the consumer, but I gave different revenue streams because sitting down in a session, whether it be a Zoom call, mental coaching, or whether it be a workshop, you can only do so much of that. And everyone talks, I think this is the biggest thing I've learned through my just experience and just learning from other people who know much more about this topic than me. I hear the term, like say, return on investment, ROI. So when you think about this in the general sense is, what do I get back from what I put in, say, financially? So I put in $1,000. Does that endeavor get me $5,000, $2,000, $100,000, whatever that return is, that's my ROI, right? So ROT is something I've learned, return on time. And that actually personally for me has done much more for me in the business sense, because now I look at, okay, I do want to get an investment to grow from what am I doing, whether it's a new project or me actually putting money into something, hopefully it comes back. But it's also, how does the time? Because Napoleon actually had a saying, space we could recover, but time never. So if you know the great Napoleon, yeah, you can say he was a megalomaniac, but he definitely was a skilled general and led his armies to take over the known world at the time. But he said something I think is very true. You can recover space. In this case, in business, you can recover money, but you can't recover time. So this is something I've learned on, does it make sense on both fronts? So if it's like, I want to do something that maybe not as much as I may want, that's fine, because people say my price is my price. And I think, yes, it should be, but there's a disingenuous argument sometimes, because you should look at it also as, well, what am I getting overall from my flexibility of time or future endeavors? Because I've had endeavors where I did a not much lower, but a lower price than I typically would want. But I started to say, hey, this connection could be even bigger. So these are things you got to think of when you talk about return on time. So as a business person, like I said, I'm just telling you from experience. I did not go to school for this. It's not business advice per se. It's more so just what I know. So look at it like that. If you're a B2C person, one, figure out what is your revenue streams, how you're going to deliver your services and or products. Can it be streamlined through other things that require less of your time? So like I said, if it's an ebook, I love ebooks because I have 2 or 3 of them that I give out for free. I never have charged for my ebooks, and they're low as 10 pages to 30 pages. And I have one that's like 80 pages, but basically you're getting value to their client for free in this case for me, but it allows it to go anywhere. Cause I guess I just got to send that ebook through an email download link or whatever it is. It's automated now on my site. You can just go there and it's sent directly to your email. And now you got this information that you would have technically got from me face to face on a one-to-one, but people miss out because it's like, oh, if your one-to-one or one-on-one calls are, let's say, $100 for a session, right? So if it's $100 for a session, guess what? Not everyone can afford that. But it doesn't mean you say, oh, screw this person because they can't afford my $100 an hour session. But if you give them that free ebook or whatever that free buy-in is, that lower tier item, now you can say, all right, I built trust, because a sale is really just emotional buys into what they believe in. Because at the end of the day, money is money, definitely. They got to be able to afford it. But more than likely, if they're inquiring, if they don't have everything you're requesting as far as monetarily, they're probably within the vicinity. Because if someone is on their last dollar, on their last meal, they're not going to hit you up for a product or service that you're selling, that if you're selling necessity items, then maybe. But if you're selling something like me, you can call what I do kind of a luxury if it's one-to-one, and now if it's corporate organization, that's a little bit different. But the point is, they're not going to hit you up if they didn't already want it, and if they're in the vicinity of being able to buy it or can buy it. So you got to say, now, how do I get the value so they can say, I'm going to purchase it, right? So that's why I like to do the free buy-ins, or the low tier buy-ins or free buy-ins, because now they can get that trust, that value. You know, I put out a lot of content as well. So let's not even go to the ebooks that gives a lot of value. I like to put out the content because I just like teaching and sharing. But guess what? It's something I tell people a lot. Don't look at it as, oh, I'm not getting a lot of views. Or people, I think, make the mistake of, if they're not getting a lot of views, they see it as unsuccessful. It's a failure. But that's not true, because think about it like a distribution. If one video starts to get taking off or peak, then you have dozens or even hundreds, I would say, after that, they're going to go on a binge. Think about when you ever went on someone's YouTube or even Instagram and you saw one video or post that you resonated with and you kept scrolling down. And before you know it, like 5 minutes went by and you're like in 2020. This is what happens, right? But let's say you only have 5 posts. It ends pretty quickly. It's just like even with like a Netflix show. If you get on a new show that you've never seen before, but it's been out for like 7-8 years, you might binge all 8 seasons in a few weeks, versus the people who had to wait day to day, week to week. And now you have that value of saying, oh, I have all this. So that's why you have to make it your imperative to get that buy-in and that trust from the sales, from the early or entry level options. So they'll be able to, trust what you're selling, because no one wants to buy something just because they're told to do it. Think about that. There's billions of dollars spent in advertising every year telling you to buy something, but you don't buy everything you see, right? There's usually someone endorsing it. That's the easiest way, but guess what? It usually comes with a big price ticket. You can always pay someone especially with social media, TikTok, Instagram. They may not be famous, they might be influencers, but you can get someone, pay them to talk about your product. But guess what? That's not enough a lot of times. When you talk about trust, people have to say, if he or she is talking to me and they're talking about a topic, in my case, I talk a lot about things that are based in science and education. So one, you got to know what you're talking about, right? Also, it's like, okay, you know what you're talking about, but is it engaging? I know there's some people might see my stuff and they're like, it's kind of boring. Some people might see my stuff like, oh God, this guy is pretty cool. But the point is, I'm trying to build that brand through my personality and deliver them something that they can say, I know what, I want this. So I kind of went on a tangent with the business side of stuff. But all in all, if you're doing B2C, which is the most common way to deliver your services or products to people, you got to make sure you have different streams. You got to make sure you're building that brand, that personality of your business and yourself, especially if you're on your own, self-employed. Most people start off on their own. Very few can just start with a team of 30 people. Even if it's 2 or 3 people, it's still you doing most of the work. And that's why I think most business fail. They say about 95% of business fail in the first year is mostly because of lack of resources, lack of team, lack of capital, and a lot of these things play on each other, because if you have a lack of capital, you probably can't get the resources. That could be equipment, that could be a facility. And now let's say you got a facility, but you're lacking capital and you have enough just to pay the expenses, but you can't get a team. So you only can go as far as you can go, which I've done for nearly a decade. And that's not very feasible or doable. And even if you can't handle it, I've handled it for years, but guess what? I have a team now and I have some part-time people, I have 4 or 5 people. So it can expand. So you have to be able to get to that point. So B2C is the number one option, but you got to make sure you can go beyond that eventually. And then depending on your market, you can go B2B, go into other businesses and getting your services utilized with other companies. That's where, like, say, courses, workshops, things like that. It's funny because I see a lot of advertisements on Instagram, especially, of people selling courses, saying what I'm pretty much saying. And it's like, your course should never be the course, if that makes sense. I think that's the biggest flaw in today's market. People are trying to be gurus and experts, virtuosos, right? People who are knowledgeable about a subject, but the actual subject matter is selling you the subject matter, if that makes sense. It's like Inception. Your course can't be selling the course. Like, I have a course that I sell, but in it is actual educational content on vision therapy, exercise physiology, cognitive science, our Mind.Body.1 techniques, numerous webinars I've done over the last 5-6 years, psychology. So you're actually learning something with content that you can then apply, keyword apply. That's why I call myself an applied psychologist, because everything I do is going to come from the realm of psychology, behavior science, cognitive science, and it's going to be applied to how you perform in your given field. So my courses contain that. So that's why I think if you go that route, business to business, that's a great route, because you can scale it much further, because a business is going to have, or organization, they're going to have more than a few people. So therefore you can get more revenue. But it's like, you have to give something that actual content, actual value. So I'll wrap up the business tangent with that. But another question I got, this was from a person who wanted to be anonymous, but they asked me my opinions on the mental health or the psychology, neuroscience, pretty much the whole brain and behavior science, I'll call it that umbrella, because I guess they're in college right now doing their undergrad in psychology and they're not too sure where they want to go with it. And they asked my input a few months ago about how to go about it and maybe choosing a career path in this field. And I had a few opinions. Some is not quite the straight and narrow, but I still understand the regular path. If you're in the brain and behavior sciences, it usually tends to be someone who's like doing mental health counseling, therapy, psychologist. Or if you go to neuroscience, you're doing studies at a university, academia. So there's a lot of different lanes you can really go, but not a lot of people talk about them. So they wanted me to touch on it, on maybe even issues in the industry. And I think what I'll call out, this is one of my biggest gripes in the brain and behavior sciences, psychology, neuroscience industry, is the experts generalize too much to lay people, and lay people don't really understand that this is not an end-all be-all. And what I mean by that is, say, insert neuroscientist or psychologist who has millions of followers, subscribers, whatever, and they make a claim that a study showed, let's say, creatine can help with depression. Studies have showed that. And that's actually a true thing that has shown. But for a layperson who has not actually done academic research, they're not dumb. They know what research means. They understand what it is. But sometimes they don't understand how to extrapolate that data. Because if I'm insert neuroscientist, psychologist with 1 million subscribers, and I say that creatine can help depression, and a study has shown that, And say you, the person who's watching, who deals with depression to some degree, maybe not severe clinical, but you deal with it to some degree, what your first notion might be is not necessarily go buy a bunch of creatine, but you're gonna look into it more. But you gotta ask, first question is, what did this study even consist of? And this is not a shot to anyone who isn't, because I've been in academia, not to full extent, but even I have struggled sometimes keeping up with it. And it's like, okay, what was the construction of that study? What was the sample size? What were their measurements? Because let's say this hypothetical study, there was 20 participants, and the pretest measure was, let's say, a subjective depression scale, like say the Beck Depression Inventory. They took that, I think it's like a few questions. And 6 weeks later, after doing creatine on a daily dosage at whatever prescribed amount, they felt less symptoms of depression. You could say successful study, the power value, it was perfect where it needed to be. But subjectively speaking, how do they really know if now you can ask this, they may have done this. Did they look at the values of, did they eat better during that 6 weeks? Did they exercise more? Did they just overall have better things happen to them in those 6 weeks? And that's the problem. And I'm going to say this, and they may not like me for saying it, but psychology, mental behaviors, mental health is one of the hardest things to quantify. So with that being said, is if that's hard to quantify, how much can we weigh what we find? And it sounds like, Nick, why are you saying this? Your whole business is about mental health and performance, right? Yes, but that's why I always make it clear in all my posts and all my talks and everything I do, that look at it from a performance. And that's why I think I butt heads with a lot of people in my industry. I don't look at it the same. I look at it from a performance side. And that's why I think I do the things the way I do it. Because from a performance side, I'll say it's more of, what does this tell me in the act of my processing, or the act of my mental health, or my act of my mindset? Because if I just say, okay, you did a faster reaction time on a Stroop task, that's when the color is incongruent with the word, right? Red written in green, blue written in yellow, so forth. Okay, it showed that you process faster, but what most studies are going to want to say is that means X. You know how many times I've done conferences or just talk to people on here, and they want to say, so what does this tell me? And I'm be like, it tells you got faster at a Stroop test. And a lot of people in this industry are not going to say it straight out like that with any of these things, because there's usually money tied to it, and going back to business. So to say that, oh, this doesn't necessarily tell me exactly what you want to hear. They want to see, if you go left, you go left. If you go right, you go right. You go up, you go up. And that's not how, at least in the brain and behavior science, it doesn't work like that. So you got to be mindful that our outcomes shouldn't be the only focus. I want to see things like, these are some intangibles that I look for when I work with my clients, but I want to look at your disposition. How do you adapt when stressors change? If I do something with a higher cognitive load, how do you act when that happens? If you're stressed before going into the task, can you regroup and persist under that stress? If you mess up, do you fall off of the endeavor? So these are things I'm looking at. So if you can't tell me this or do this, that's a problem. So these are things I think we need to give more attention to in this field, because if we're always stuck on the studies, and I'm not saying don't care about studies, because all the drills I come up with, the apps I've created, all that is based off of research. I read it in the study first. So it's not that I'm knocking studies. It's just the fact that it shouldn't always be, because I think it's easier to present it to the lay people, because if you don't understand this and someone with a PhD tells you, hey, X happened and we got Y, or Y happened and we got Z, you're going to be like, oh, that's how it should be. Because it's easier for our brains. If you want to get to the science of it, it's easier for our brains to even wrap our heads around it, right? Our brain is very good at filling in the gaps, right? So if we're told this study showed this outcome, we run with it. And that's what most of the market pushes in the neuro field, or even in the psychology field. They're going to push what the academics say. And we can even get into like saying the internal versus external validity, right? If we do something in a more lab setting, or we do something with a lot of variables accounted for, it'll give us a good result that we can say this was the reason the outcome came, which is great. We want to see that. But it's like, are we researching for the sake of research? Because external validity means how objective can that be outside of here when the parameters aren't set up the way we set them, right? That's what we want to see. Can it be done in the real world? But that's a line that's very hard to walk in the behavior sciences. So that's why I think the issue is in this field, to answer the person's question, like there's a lot of things that needs to be accounted for. And I think it goes to egos that people got to understand, like, you don't got all the answers, Sway. Like Kanye said, I ain't got all the answers. Me neither. So that's where I think the difference is in the psychology and the neuro field is that both sides got to come to an agreement to understand that we got to look at multiple things. No one side knows it all. I know there's obvious incentive to push or publish things that go in hand with what you're doing. Obviously, you're not going to make research and keep putting out things that show that your theories or hypotheses are wrong, but that's what it's about, right? So we got to make sure we dabble in to everything. So I guess to answer your question, that the psych field and neuro field can improve, I think, just by being more open to each other's sides, really. It's kind of, I always joke, I did this on the Mark Bell's podcast for back in May, and I joked, this is like the East Coast, West Coast beat. Those who may be younger than 25 may not be too familiar with this, but there was a time when rappers from both coasts hated each other, and Tupac and Biggie, if you remember them, that was a big poster child for it. They weren't the only ones beefing, but that was probably the biggest poster child for it. And I think that's how it goes in the psychology versus neuro field. Like there's a lot, even in the psychology, let's just forget neuro for a second, even psychology, I see in that umbrella, there's a lot of divided houses. Because I was at a conference for sports psychology a few weeks ago, and even there was people who were looking at it as, certain sides get tended to more. Like they look at more of the clinical side versus the applied practical side. And what does that even mean? Matter of fact, segue. When people say mental performance, mental training, mental health, I would ask you, what comes to mind? Because when I ask this question, whether it's at events, workshops, or just directly talking to someone, they have to stop for a second, and they usually don't have an answer. And if they do have an answer, it's usually relegated to maybe 2 or 3 responses. The general one I think I hear the most when they think of like mental health or mindset or performance, they'll say something alongside like meditation or box breathing, which is great. I have nothing against that. Then I'll think people say things like, when they say like training your mind, your brain, they'll say something like crossword puzzles, things like that, which is fine too. Or just general reading, just educating yourself, which is all great, but it's not as finite, because if I say, what do you do to be in shape to work out? You'll give me, I do squats, I do lunges, I do sprints, I do cardio, I do spin. I do all of that. See how definite those answers are? But when we talk about the brain or the mind or psychology, mental health, it's either crickets, because there's not really a clear-cut picture outside of, say, therapy maybe. And there's nothing wrong with that. I actually went to school to be a psychologist. I didn't finish, but I did enough courses to learn psychopathology and did mock sessions. So there's definitely a place for that. I always argue 90% or about 10 to 12% of the world's population will suffer from some type of, or should say deal with some type of severe clinical mental disorder, right? But what about the other 88 to 90% of the world who their mental health struggles, their mental performance issues, their brain health struggles will be from day-to-day stressors that aren't severe? We call them subclinical, right? Because things happen on a lower spectrum. We look at mental health as a spectrum. We talk about things like, if I go off the rails a little bit, we can talk about psychopathy, narcissism. We can talk about depression, bipolar. There's different degrees. We got to look at the frequency. We got to look at the duration, the intensity, the onset. Got to look at what the symptoms actually look like. So it's not just about, am I this or that? So for the people who say are dealing with depression and it's not clinical, but they still have trouble getting through their day because their mind wanders, they might feel like they don't have what it takes, whatever it may be. Who's serving that population? That's where, going back to Mind.Body.1 Week, by the way, for those who just got in, that's what we're trying to do. Because if I said I'm working with police officers who deal with trauma, they should probably see a therapist. But on top of that, what if I told them they did some cognitive work where it puts their brain under actual stressful scenarios and situations where they got to think under pressure, use cognitive flexibility, make decisions. They have to react quickly in a timely manner, and they have to do this repeatedly so it gets sustained, just like how a muscle will, right? I call myself instrumental muscle. Muscles adapt. So does your brain, so does your mindset. So why wouldn't we do that? It sounds pretty clear-cut me saying it right here, right? But in practice, where does it really happen? It doesn't. It very rarely doesn't. And I think this other part of the graph, going back to the East Coast, West Coast industry thing, is the practitioners who really do the applied stuff usually don't come from a pure psych or a pure neuro background. they get it, but they don't have the same mindset from the educational side. And I think that's an issue, but they get it from the practical side. And on the other side, the ones who really know the book stuff, the education, the PhDs, they get it from that side, but they don't put it into practice. And there's a gap that needs to be bridged, and that's where Mind.Body.1 comes in. That's what has been my mission, I would say, for the last decade plus, because it's not one without the other. And I know it seems cliche, I keep saying it, and thus it literally is the name of my business, but it's like they have to be unified, and not just from the typical way of saying, oh, I'm going to be mindful in the moment. Like, we need to train your brain, train your mindset, train your mental skills. So not only do you learn these skills, but you learn how to apply them. You get put to the test doing actual tasks that require other mental skills, so you can test, reassess, see your disposition, see your mannerism, subjectively rate how well you did, objectively rate how well you did. If I can measure it, oh, you did 0.2 of a second slower last week, you got better. What happened? If I can narrate what happened, that means I can make sense of it and say, oh, this is what's different. And if you know what's different, that's the only way you can improve. So you see how we can bring this all together? And that's why, going back to why I even want to do Mind.Body.1 Week, I want to touch on a bunch of different topics, because a lot of times it gets lost in transition where people, like when they talk about mental health. I remember another story. It was about 2 years ago when the Summer Olympics 2021, they got postponed, obviously, because of COVID. But in 2021, Simone Biles withdrew from, I think, her final competition, and she's reigning champ. And a lot of people commended her and said this is great for mental health because it's bringing attention, bringing awareness. And I made a comment on one of my therapist friends' posts, and she knows me personally, but she kind of pushed back on me for what I said. So basically what I said was, I disagree. This is not good. And she's like, how could you say that? People are talking. And I'm like, that's why. Mental health, mental performance, anything regarding that should not be treated as today's hot topic. You know why? Because if it's used that like sensationalized and viral, it's going to die down like any other viral trend. And we don't want that. It has to happen, like I said earlier, with the business side, it has to happen in waves that consistently go, because if it just comes in at one peak moment and just fizzles out, who are really helping? Because lo and behold, after that fizzled out and everyone was praising her and saying, you got to do self-care, which is another overused buzzword, no one was talking about it. Matter of fact, when the last time you thought about that? Until just now. I don't know. Maybe you have. But the point I'm getting at is, it does a disservice because, yeah, let's say 1 million people were talking about mental health in a very serious, proactive way for a week. But after that, let's be extreme. None did. Out of that 1 million, none of them were talking about it still. And that's very possible. I'm not even being far-fetched. Now, let's say in another scenario, it doesn't reach 1 million in that peak, but it hits 20,000 every day consistently. Eventually, you're going to get that 1 million. And if my math's not off, you're going to get that before the year's over. So you see how getting it in that side's work, because it's more consistent. You want something's longer lasting. That's the problem, because people want to have the sensational in anything. It's not even just our let's connect this real quick. It's not even just our ability to, deal with it, but it's also the fact that once we get used to it, it's not going to be a buzzword. And that's why I think it should be. So getting into that point, mental health is something I think really should be utilized in a different light of just, talk therapy. Like I said, it's not a knock to that. I think that's very important too, because it's like anything, there's different ways to do it, because some people will not really even want to do, let alone respond to talk therapy. So where's the market for them? And you keep trying to put this square peg into a round hole, you're not going to get the feedback or the attention you want. So my mindset is, let's provide different resources. So leading into that, let's talk about things coming up for Mind.Body.1, because if no one has any questions, I'll just keep going on about this stuff. But getting to that, Mind.Body.1 has a lot of things on the horizon. If you didn't know, we have our Grids app, which is coming out November 20th. So that's exactly 17 days it'll be out. So I'm very excited for that. So the Grids app, if you're not familiar with a concentration grid, is basically when there's a set of numbers scrambled out of order. The simplest way we used to do this back in the day, you print out a piece of paper with the grid. It's a bunch of block squares, and you'll put them in numerical order, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. If there's 25, do all 25 as fast as you can. You time it. There's 100, do all 100. There's 50. Whatever the amount is, you finish it. You cross out with a pen or a pencil. Now, they got a little more fancy when they made the app. So there was a grid app that I was actually using for about probably 6 years. And I used it with some of my top athletes, my military, you name it. I used it with everyone. And I wasn't fully satisfied with it, not because it was bad. It did exactly what it needed to do. And I got innovative as much as I could. But it was just the numbers. So with the Grids app, I added different features. So as the memory mode, so you have to actually use working memory and cognition. And it's pretty stressful. It also has stress mode. It's actually one of my favorite modes. So with stress mode, you have 100 numbers, 50 numbers, or 25 numbers. Your choice, either 30 seconds for the 25 or a minute for the 150 number set. And you're going to have these numbers all over trying to find them in order. So that's already stressful because you're scanning, trying to find them. But on the side, there's 4 circles that can light up. You can choose green, red, blue. 2 of those options or all 3, and they'll periodically light up, and you got to press them to put it out, because you have to do this because it's shifting your attention from the main task of following the numbers and then going back to the circle, then back to the numbers. And you can't progress on the numbers until you put out the circle. So you can see how this could be just daunting from that standpoint, but it's also stressful because there's time checkpoints at 30 minutes or 30 seconds. It makes this loud, annoying alarm for 5 seconds and does it again at 15 seconds. And then the last 5 seconds, it does a countdown to induce more stress, because time is a great stress inducer, right? So this task is amazing. And the beauty of all the grids, they end with analytics that show how well you perform as far as your average reaction time, your variance to see how consistent you were, and also how much you found. And that way you can make sense of the data. Now, outside of that, we have an analytics questionnaires 3, 1 for stress, 1 for self-talk, and 1 for focus. So now you can have subjective measures. So when it saves your data, it shows the subjective measures and the objective measures side by side. So now you can imagine this. If you're a practitioner watching this, imagine going to your client who's dealing with stress and they can't understand how to cope with it. I can sit there and say, what caused this stress in this task? Where did you see yourself fall off? How did you objectively do? How did you subjectively do? And how do we make sense of this? And then we can apply it and redo it again, change variables, make it more task heavy, make it less task heavy, make it easier if you need to, whatever it may be. So you see how we can quantify and make the intangible tangible, because I already mentioned on here, it's very hard to do in this field. So the more or the closer we can get to making it tangible, better likelihood we have to make this industry really grow. So the Grids app, that's on deck November 20th. I'm so excited to release this, because the beauty of it is when it goes live, it's not just the app. You download the app, cool, you can download it and go about your way. But the real bread and butter is that we're going to have actual videos with different tasks for different demographics. That could be vision therapy, that could be mental coaches, that could be sport, that could be fitness, active aging, kids, mindset, ADHD. So now you have these practical tasks to do with the grid versus just, hey, here's a tool you have fun. And that's another issue I think that happens in our field, especially with the practical applied stuff, is there's no really standardization. There's not a lot of tools to use. And the ones you do use, they're either very pricey, expensive, or ambiguous. So we're trying to take the guesswork away from you and make this as common as you would go to the gym. And that's what Mind.Body.1 is doing with the Grids app. So those who are watching this is a sneak peek. I haven't talked about this much Grids I have, because that's about to come out, but there's 2 more we're working on. So the second one is called Briefs. Now, Briefs is using AI and mental coaching. So think TikTok meets ChatGPT meets Peloton. And I'll tell you why. So the TikTok aspect is because there will be bite-sized information to help with your mental health, like you would see a TikTok or a reel or a short. That way you're getting short form content just like you would in the world's just used to now. But it's confined to these topics that relate to mental health and performance, confidence, goal setting, mindset, overcoming obstacles, you name it. And it's not so like cookie cutter. It'll come from people who can really voice their opinions from different walks of life. Not necessarily all mental coaches or mental health practitioners, but people who can give the insight, right? So that's where the TikTok Reels element comes in. But from the AI side of it, we're going to give you brief, keyword brief, responses that are succinct and to the point that help you with whatever you're going through, but we want you to use it less, right? There's something in psychology called solution-focused brief therapy, when they want you to pretty much get to the root of your issue within like 10 sessions or less. It really wasn't meant to be this a long, drawn-out thing, because there is people that may go to therapy for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and that's fine. If that's what they need to do to cope and deal, have at it. But let's say for the people who want a more solution-focused, problem-solving type approach, that's what this is, because the goal is kind of gamified, is to get you to use it less, to have a time system of how many times did you get a brief that's measured by how many words or actual voice time utilized, giving you answers to your questions you need help with. So if you say, hey, I'm struggling with this week, I've been overwhelmed with work, I don't know if I'll be able to get to my deadline. Boom. However long that took, 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 50 words, 20 words, is measured. And once you get a certain amount, I won't disclose all that just yet. I'll keep that. But I can tell you this much. You have a meter where it fills up and you know how much you got. Once you go over it, then you're notified that, oh, you went over it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't keep using it. Obviously, get as much help as you need. But the goal is to get that not to go over the regulated amount. So you're now conditioned. Think about how operant conditioning works, right? Those who aren't familiar with operant conditioning, there's fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, variable interval. So these are schedules of reinforcement. And basically all this means is giving certain feedback and reinforcement at different periods, different amounts will affect how someone responds and achieves their goal. So that's why with the app, with Briefs, it's not just about getting the bite-sized information, learning. It's also about asking the AI to help you, because you want to have some, help that can be accessible anytime, but we're still going to have this with a Peloton aspect, and not in the physical sense, more so how Peloton has a coaching culture. Think about having an actual coach or coaches that can help you out in bite-sized ways. You can actually talk or communicate with them and get to something between you two. That way it still has a human factor. So I'm really excited for this. So I'm going to leave that one at that, because this is still proprietary, still under development, early stages still, but the Grizz app will be out soon. And the third one, I won't go into detail really much at all about this one, but just know this will be uniting all of the Mind.Body.1 concepts, from the cognitive, the psychological, the neural performance, the fitness, the physical. Yeah, I'm not even going to say the name of that one. So stay tuned for that. So this is what's coming up. That's why I'm so excited for Mind.Body.1 Week. I'm excited for what Mind.Body.1 has in store as a whole, because just from the app side, the program side, a lot's in store. But also we look at from the actual business side, we're doing a lot more. We've gotten contracts with United Healthcare. We're doing a lot of work with that. So our actual business, I have workers under me now that are helping tremendously. Shouts out to them. They've been helping so much grow the business. They're covering other things where I can be CEO and make things happen, because we're really looking to expand in different demographics, provide different services. And really, I'm going to say it right here, I'm trying to be the Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs of the mental health, brain health, performance industry. I just said it right here. And that's not in an egotistical way. I just want to be able to provide the value and give a different option. That's really what it's about, giving the option so people can get better. It's all about performance. Like I said, at the end of the day, I'm about performing. Performing is a general term, but it means so much, because how you perform in anything dictates how you're able to succeed in your outcomes. Your performance shapes the outcome, right? People talk about outcomes all the time. What did I do to get here? You can ask yourself. I always say you need to shape your process first, because process shapes the performance. Performance dictates the outcomes. You need all three parts. Outcomes is what you want. Performance is how well do you execute, and process is what do you do to get there. So all those put together will get you to the outcome. So that's why we're really striving to build these programs. I have a number 2 now that she's helping me tremendously, and I'm very excited for her. She's new in her journey in the original sports psych world, but it's going to be the mental world, and I'm really excited for her to get her bearings. But basically, all in all, if anyone's still out there, if you're still watching, feel free to ask me questions. I'm here. I'm open book. But Mind.Body.1, we have so much in store. This Mind.Body.1 week was, like I said, meant to just give value. Like I said, I'll try to give value, but we're trying to give even more. So hopefully we get, some good feedback. And thanks everybody for tuning in. As always, I'm very excited. Save your calendars for November 9th. That'll be Mind.Body.1 Day. So stay tuned for that. I don't know. Yeah, I'm surprised something's going to happen that day, but all else, get your mind right. Thanks for tuning in.